Stocks give up some gains to trade at the day's low after a gap-up start following the Maharashtra poll outcome and a rally in US equities. All sectors continue to trade with gains. Indian rupee surges along with most Asian currencies after Donald Trump appoints Scott Bessent, a known fiscal hawk, as his Treasury Secretary. Rupee gains 0.21% versus the dollar to 82.26 versus Friday's close of 84.38. In an important constant shuffle for the benchmark, BSE Sensex, Zomato will enter and JSW Steel will exit the index on December 23rd. The swap fuels a rally in Zomato while the JSW stock comes under pressure. The Maharashtra election sweep by the BJP-led alliance powers up infrastructure and realty stocks with significant exposure to the state. Realty experts see a focus on infra spend driving growth for the sector. About $1.7 billion could flow into Indian equities as a result of the rebalancing of MSCI indices today. HDFC Bank could see its second weight increase in the global index as part of the recalibration. Hello and welcome to Business Lunch. I'm Sonal Bhutra and those were the top headlines that we are tracking. But for the markets, which have fallen sharply from the highs of the day, still in the green, of course, it's around a 250 or 230 point gain that we're seeing on the Nifty, but it is below the 24,300 high that we saw during the day today. So it's a 1% gain on the Nifty. Midcaps are doing well, 940 points higher there, and Bank Nifty too is doing well, supporting the index up around 1.7%. But again, the story is it has slightly come off from the highs of the day. We'll have to see which way things go by the end of the trading session, because there was a lot of optimism when we started the trading session. The GIFT Nifty indicated a 400-point gap up on the Nifty. So that's what's happening in terms of sectoral movers. Most of the sectors, in fact, all the sectors are in the green, and it is led by the PSU banking space, which is up around 4%. But to the other big story, the winter session is off to a stormy start. The Lok Sabha was adjourned for the day after the opposition pressed for a discussion on the Adani bribery row. The Rajya Sabha too was adjourned to meet on Wednesday. Ahead of the session, Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed the media. He hit out at the opposition, alleging that people rejected by public are trying to control Parliament. Listen into a small excerpt of his address.
साथियों, संसद का ये सत्र अनेक प्रकार से विशेष है और सबसे बड़ी बात है हमारे संविधान के 75 साल की यात्रा, 75वें साल में उसका प्रवेश पार्लियामेंट में स्वस्थ चर्चा हो, ज्यादा से ज्यादा लोग चर्चा में अपना योगदान दें.
Okay, that's the word coming in from the Prime Minister. But let's quickly take a look at the markets yet again, because it's the PSU index really that's surging today, and the fall from the highs also was led by the fall that we saw in the PSU banking index. So PSU banks up 4.3%. We have this Nifty CPSE, which is up around 3.1%, ONGC, BEL, all of these are the big gainers that we are seeing in the Nifty as well. The realty index is the other one, which is surging 3% higher on that one after the election results in the state of Maharashtra, and all of that is impacting the stock market move today as well. But let's move on and go across to my colleague Parikshit. He's joining us now to tell us what to track so far from day one of the session and also what's on the agenda going ahead. Parikshit?
Well, it was a stormy session indeed. Both houses were adjourned over the U.S. court's indictment of Gautam Adani and 9 others on bribery charges. So the opposition was seeking a joint parliamentary committee probe and also sought answers. They wanted the adjournment of House proceedings to discuss this issue in great detail. So this is going to be a headache for the government in the parliament session, the winter session of parliament. There were also demands for discussion on violence in Manipur, the pollution in Delhi. There are about 16 bills which have been lined up in this session. This includes a Disaster Management Amendment Bill, Bharatiya Vayuyan Vidhayak 2024 Bill, which replaces the Aircraft Act and increases the ease of doing business in the aviation sector. You've got the bills of Lading Bill, Carriage of Goods by Sea Bill, Railways Amendment, the Waqf Repeal Bill, the Banking Laws Amendment Bill, the Oil Fields Regulation and Amendment Bill 2024 as well. We are also going to see possibly a lot of questions being raised by the opposition in the next 2 to 3 days over the Adani issue, and it seems that the government is formulating a plan to answer them in the days to come.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Parikshit, for bringing us all these details. We'll keep coming back to you for more updates on this one. But moving on, the government is set to move the banking laws bill in Lok Sabha for passage. The number of bank nominees will increase to 4 per account. Sapna Das is joining us now to tell us more. Sapna.
Well, this has been in the pipeline for quite some time. If you recall, the finance minister had tabled this bill in the parliament way back in the monsoon session, and it's most likely that the current winter session is going to see the passage of this bill. Having said that, I think it has been a long-standing demand to increase the number of nominees per bank account. So that is what is being proposed from the current 1 to 4. Also, the rights of these nominees are going to be as per their contribution to the deposits that we are talking about. So that needs to be kept in mind. That is one, of course. Second, and also in terms of easier access to unclaimed deposits, unclaimed dividends. All those amounts are going to be refunded basically from the Investor Education Protection Fund. There also the government has actually stepped up the money. So that's a second facilitation that we're talking about. Of course, it remains to be seen once it rolls out what kinds of terms and rules and regulations or terms and conditions are there in that. Third, of course, in terms of increasing or rather redefining or changing the definition of substantial interest by directors, basically in banks mainly. So here the definition was very outdated. The substantial interest was defined as like 5 lakh or something. Way back 1968, that was what it was decided. Now it's being revised to around 2 crores. So this is basically being in sync with the times. Last but not the least, these banking bill amendments will also enable banks to basically increase or change the remuneration of auditors. I think that again is to enable these entities to have the best talent on the market. I think remuneration of auditors has been an issue for quite some time. It had been a long ask, and that's what the government is going to do through the amendments to this bill. Remains to be seen whether the bill is going to be moved for passage today. We'll also have to wait and watch and listen to the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman talk on the same bill.
Oh, okay, all right. Thank you so much, Sapna, for joining us with all those details. So those are some important updates. But we'll take a short break. When we return, we'll focus on a whole host of stocks that are buzzing in trade today. Stay tuned for that. Welcome back. Well, let's talk about some stocks and some big news in focus. The Adani indictment by a US district court is creating fresh troubles for the group around the world. Here are some of the latest developments. A review committee formed by Bangladesh's interim government has recommended an investigation agency to examine power agreements signed by deposed Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's government with different business groups, including the one with Adani Group. Separately, we understand from news reports that a US agency is reviewing the impact of Department of Justice bribery allegations against Gautam Adani and other executives on the agency's prior agreement to lend more than $550 million to a Sri Lankan port development backed by the Adani Group. Back home, a fresh plea has been filed in the Supreme Court claiming that the indictment order and SEC complaint have unveiled malpractices carried out by the conglomerate. The plea claims that the allegations raised are of a serious nature and should be investigated by Indian authorities. Adani Group stocks are, however, higher in trade today after last week's sharp decline. Okay, let's move on to a CNBC-TV18 exclusive now. Our colleague Yash is joining us with the latest he has on the role of IRDAI intermediaries and what he's picking up. Yash.
Well, Sonal, the insurance regulator IRDAI had appointed a committee. The task for this committee was to suggest changes, amendments into the insurance intermediary space. New things being suggested in terms of the functioning of the intermediaries. What are these intermediaries? Essentially, any channel which distributes insurance products on behalf of an insurance company. These could include banks, agents, agency, as well as insurance aggregators. Now, what we've been given to understand is that the committee is expected to, give 5 important suggestions to the regulator in terms of changes that we could see in the coming days as far as the insurance intermediary space is concerned. The first one is with respect to increasing the free look period beyond the current 1 month. Essentially, what's a free look period? It is the period within which a policyholder or an insured entity can opt out of an insurance policy or port to another insurer for the same policy. That period currently stands at 1 month. The suggestion could be to increase that period beyond 1 month. The second one is to allow agents to tie up with more than one life, health and general insurance company. Currently, banks are allowed to do that, to tie up with 9 life, general and health insurance companies. The same is being suggested as far as agents are also concerned. The third one is no sale of complex insurance products through bank assurance channel. The fourth one is with respect to banks maintaining video records of every insurance policy sold by bank executives, essentially the bank assurance channel. And the fifth and the final one is removal of sales target as far as banks giving targets to their employees in terms of insurance sales is concerned and taking action in case of any violation. Certain suggestions here that could come to the regulator will also hold a lot of importance, certainly in context of the recent statements that came from the finance minister as well as the IRDAI chairperson with respect to mis-selling as far as the bank assurance channel is also concerned.
All right. Thank you so much, Yash, for joining us with those details. We'll track this story very closely. But to the other big one, the Indian rupee gained a sharp 0.2% to trade at 84.26 per dollar, up from Friday's close of 84.44. It is in line with the rise in all Asian currencies. Lata Venkatesh is joining us to tell us what really led to this and what's the outlook. Lata.
Yes, the Indian rupee has jumped about 0.2%. This is the highest jump I've seen since the first week of November. In fact, it's the highest single-day jump in quite some time to 84.26 from the overnight Friday close of 84.44. And already on Friday, 84.44 was a bit of a gain from the 84.5 that the currency had touched earlier on Thursday. So this gain is in sync. Today's gain is in sync with what other Asian currencies have done. Indonesian rupiah up about 0.5%, Thai baht up 0.1%, the ringgit is up almost 0.25%. So the rupee is in step with all this. And what is the reason? The single biggest reason is the appointment of Scott Bessent as the Treasury Secretary designate by Donald Trump. He will take over, of course, on Jan 20th after Trump is sworn in. Now, Bessent is known as a fiscal hawk. He's believed to have made statements that he will bring down the US fiscal deficit from the current around 8%, 6 to 8%, to 3% by about 2028. Now, what this will mean is fewer treasury issuance, and you will notice that on Friday itself, the US yields fell a goodish bit. But if there is lesser supply of bonds in the next few years, then obviously the bond yields fall, and then you saw the yields fall to about 4.3 from 4.44 and nearly 4.5 that they touched earlier in the week. The expectation, of course, is that the dollar also will therefore give up a little of its gains because you will get lesser money, lesser yield for dollar bonds. And therefore, it looks like the dollar has peaked for now, or at least the rupee has bottomed for now. The other big reason, of course, is a lot of dollar sales by FPIs. So it looks like today you will have a positive FPI number for the equity markets as well.
Okay, all right. So that would be some relief, right, for the rupee market and the equity markets as well. Thank you so much, Lata, for making sense of the moves that we've been seeing in the currency market, some relief on the rupee levels. Let's slip into a short break now. When we return, we'll take a look at the key takeaways from COP29 Climate Summit that concluded in Baku last week. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're still tuned into Business Lunch on CNBC-TV18. Well, the COP29 summit, it ended in Baku over the weekend, and there was a big update that came by. It was on climate finance goal because they have finalized it now. They will be tripling climate finance to $300 billion, which compares with the earlier target that they had of $100 billion. But that was achieved by the developed countries. So now they increased it to $300 billion to be given to developing countries every year by 2035. Now, remember, developing countries, they had asked for $1 trillion in terms of climate finance every year to meet their climate goals. So there has been a lot of dissatisfaction after this particular agreement was signed as well. Climate finance, according to the agreement, will be raised via a variety of sources, public or private, bilateral or multilateral, including alternate sources as well. But as I said, most of the countries, they were not happy with this outcome. Developing countries or be it smaller nations. India itself, India's stance was that this goal is too little and too distant. They also call this amount abysmally poor and paltry as well. But again, India signed the agreement, but with a lot of dissatisfaction. In fact, when the negotiations were undergoing as well, a lot of these small island state delegations and the other developed nations as well, or the least developed nations, they walked out of negotiations on the funding package. They called it the climate finance interest being ignored by the developed nations after this particular COP. And this COP generally has been a non-event because not majority of decisions were taken here. There was no word on the fossil fuel consumption ending as well. No further development on carbon credit regulations as well. Now on climate finance, since this was going and this was called as the climate COP, what are the estimates? In fact, IRENA estimates $5 trillion by 2030 is needed by all the countries to fight the issue of climate change. And just the developing countries, according to IEA, need $1 trillion by 2030 to fight the problem of climate change. So that's the amount of climate finance which is needed as per estimates, considering inflation, considering how climate events have been increasing. So this has come in as a disappointment as far as the COP29 is concerned. Well, that's about COP29, the big climate summit that took over the weekend, ended over the weekend after 2 weeks. But with that, we'll take your leave on this edition of Business Land. Stay tuned. Midcap Radar comes up next.